All right, hey everybody. Welcome to the third week of the Ruby on Rails decal. And actually, before we answer this question, I want to take a quick poll. How many of you guys started the homework? Okay, that's a good amount of you. How many guys actually finished the homework? Okay. For the people that have finished, how many of you guys just blazed it under an hour? Okay, how about between 1 and 3 hours? Okay, 3 to 5? And did any of you take over 5 hours so far? Okay. Ideally, it wasn't meant to take so long, but you know, if you guys ever need help and if you feel like you're just bashing your head against the wall, you should come by office hours. And I believe, well, I have office hours tomorrow, and I don't think any of the other TAs do, but we'll try to be pretty active on Piazza. All right, so today we're going to go over databases and the concept of models in Ruby on Rails, what migrations are, and database queries. So basically, in our in the web apps that we make, we wonder, like, how do we persist data? How do we store information so that when the app, like, you know, we run Rails C, right? Or you run Rails S, Rails server, that you start your server. When you close it, the app just dies. How do we store that information? And the answer is databases, or are databases. Can't grammar, but it's okay. So what are databases? How many of you guys here have taken CS 186? Okay, there's one of you. Does anyone want to kind of volunteer to explain what a database is? All right, I guess not. So we'll just move on to the next slide. So what are databases? Databases are used to store and retrieve information. And commonly, databases are composed of many tables, or within a single database, you have different collections of information. In Ruby on Rails, every model that we make corresponds to a specific table. And we'll get into more depth about that later. Each table has its own set of attributes, or other words, columns. You could think about, like we said, I believe in like the first week, that you could just think about a database as a collection of just a bunch of CSV files. And if you've seen CSV files, on the top row, there might be something that identifies the column, or like, what does this represent? Like an age for a person, or their social security number. And then each row below that represents like an entry of a person, like, oh, I am 5 years old and this is my social security number. If you want to get more in depth about this, I would recommend taking CS 186. I've taken the class, and I think most people actually find it pretty boring, but I thought it was pretty interesting. It was one of my favorites. So there are many types of databases. And so the four I've shown up here, one is Postgres. It's a open source database that's really common. If any of you know what Heroku is, all of their databases default to Postgres. Another type of database is SQLite. It's just basically all your data is actually stored in this like binary text file. Another database is MongoDB. It's one of those NoSQL databases. And the one to the far right is MySQL, which is another really common one. And I used it at work during my last internship, so yeah. But our database of choice for this class is SQLite. And the reason for that is that setting up databases on your personal laptops might actually take a while. And there's like, it's a somewhat time-consuming process that we just don't want to worry about. So we could just abstract all this information away from you, because Rails comes with SQLite installed, or SQLite. So wait, just to take a pause, do we have any questions so far? Okay. So this, I brought up another diagram of the MVC models. We recognize our client, which before was our Firefox browser. Cases for set. This dispatcher, you could just it's synonymous with our browser, right? If the client asks for something or dispatcher, you'll start controller. And what we covered last week was, okay, let's skip the M in our MVC model and just go straight to our views, generate HTML and CSS to send back to our client. Now, what we're going to append right now is steps 3 and 4. So, for example, like when you go to your feed on Facebook, you're going to make, like, if you go to facebook.com, this dispatcher will be like, oh, this guy's asking to go to the home URL. The controller is like, oh, this is our feed, right? Because we check that this person's logged in. So we need to basically gather all our previous information about who your friends are and what kind of posts they've written. They probably do a lot of, like, magic algorithms and stuff to figure out what are the best posts to show on your feed. And then they generate a view. It comes back to the controller, and it generates your view, and it sends it finally back to the client. And yeah, this is what we're focusing on, steps 3 and 4. So models in Rails. Models are built into the Rails framework. They're really nice because they provide you with a lot of methods that you don't need to define, and they interact with the database for you. For example, how many people here know how to write an SQL query? Okay, a decent amount of you do. But what models allow you to do is you don't have to write query like, oh, select or star or like certain attributes in whatever table where, like, put conditions on. It simplifies that for you with a bunch of functions. And it's probably really hard to see. You could find these notes online later. To make any class you define a model, you just have to make that class inherit from active record base. Why models are important? They're, like I said earlier, they're basically the core of your app because they basically gather all the information for you, and it lets you present that information, lets your controller present that information through the views. In a future lecture, we'll cover validations, or basically like making sure that models have correct data, relationships, tying two different models together, and just other abilities it has. But today, we're just going to focus on the core basics. So what Rails provides you, instead of, like, you manually going to your app/models folder and typing create a new file, and then do class, whatever the name of the model is, inherit from active record base. It provides you with a command line tool called Rails generate model. All you have to do is put in the model name and the name of the columns on the model. The example that's right below is Rails generate model user name string age integer. When you run that command line for you, Rails will automatically generate you several files that basically create you a user object for you to use, and that user will have a name associated with it and age associated with it. So what are migrations? Migrations are changes to your database. Every time you run basically a migration file gives you a list of instructions, right? And when you run that migration, you'll run these changes and make changes to your database. So you could basically add or remove columns. You could also rename them. And you could even delete whole tables. And an easy way to create migrations is using this generator, Rails generate migration, name a migration. And it'll set up basic groundwork for you. And finally, the last piece of advice, or not the first, to actually run, after you generate migration files, the command you want to run is break db migrate. What Rails will automatically do is look through your migrations folder, detect it will store when the last migration was ran. They'll find any new migrations that haven't ran and run those and change your database. Important thing is never change migrated migrations. What that means is after you call rake db migrate, don't change your migration files. What you want to do instead is append migrations on top. The reason is that the current look of your database should be represented by combining all the deltas of your migrations sequentially. So if you change a migration file, then these deltas no longer actually reflect what your database looks like. Sorry, actually, who here has questions? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I was actually really hoping someone would ask that question because I realized I didn't explain what the difference between a model is and a migration, the difference between a model and migration. And it's actually something that when I first started Rails, I absolutely could not tell what the difference was. So I've said before, like I've only like briefly mentioned it within the first lecture that your database is actually completely independent from the rest of your web application. All your database is concerned about is data storage and like basically the ability to add, delete, or update data. And you have a web application that runs on top of your database, or it connects with your database. You could think of it as a completely separate thing, and it only talks to each other through a certain API. I'll show you where that API comes in the gem file. But for now, just pretend there's two separate things, right? Database, Rails application. Database stores all the logic. Your Rails application, database stores all your data. Your Rails application has all your logic to control the data, to control what happens to the data. Your database doesn't handle requests. Your Rails application will take in a request like, oh, give me the home page of your website. And your application will then ask the database, can you grab this information from me? So that being said, let's say at some point you realize, hey, maybe I want to rewrite my web application, right? So I don't want to use Ruby on Rails anymore. I want to use Golang or Node or Scala. But you don't have to worry about losing your data because your database is actually completely separate. You could just disconnect the Rails part of it and then throw something new on top. You'll still have the data, but you just have now a different language of how you interact with the data and how you generate back the views. Does that help? Yeah. Oh, that definitely should have been a slide, the differentiating factors between what a model is and what a database is. Are there any more questions? Okay. So just to get into a little bit more specifics about migrations, or just so you can have a slide to use as a reference, migrations have the ability to add columns. Like a migration creates adds tables to your database, right? And after you create a table, like earlier I said, don't ever change a migration file. We don't want to edit the migration file to now say to add a column. We have to create a new migration. So there's a function called add_column. And what you pass it is the name of the table, the name of the column, and the type of the column. We have a similar function called remove underscore column, and all you have to do is pass it the name of your table and the name of the column. Last one is renaming columns, where you just have to call rename underscore column, put the name of the table, the original name of the column, and then your new name of the column. This is just more like a reference slide for you guys to use later. So querying your database. So don't worry if like all this is like I'm going really fast over this. Don't freak out. I'm going to do an example of me creating all these models and doing all these queries and stuff. So if you don't, you only have to kind of get now, just get the large picture, and we'll get into specifics later. So normally when you query a database, you have to, or like let's say you want to find a specific person, or someone with specific ID. Normally, when you have like your querying language, what you do is like, select the name of the attributes you want from the table where ID matches the certain ID. Rails makes it simple. You just have to put the name of the model called .find and pass it an ID number, and it will find you the model with that ID. But let's say we don't want to find by ID. We want to find by like, I want to find a user by their email. Rails does this magic where when you initialize your application, the model will look to its associate table in the database, look at its columns, and create methods for you to help you find information. So another one is model.findBy. So basically, you just pass it an attribute, and like for example, the attribute's email, and you pass the email like a@b.com, then Rails will run a query for you where it'll generate the query string of select star from users where email equals a@b.com. The difference between find by and where is where returns a list. So when you run a query, you could actually have multiple things that match the query. Like if you have a database of students, right? A lot of people are like there are probably a lot of like 20-year-olds in Berkeley right now, right? If we did a find by aged 20, where the age is 20, we would get that a lot. There are a lot of matches that come with it. Where basically gives you an array. Find by takes one element from the array. So one guarantees a single object, the other one guarantees all the objects. Another useful method is the first method or the last method. So basically, if you're developing on Rails and you just want a quick model to use, you can just do the model name.first, and it'll return the first instance of that model in your database. And if you do .last, it'll return the last one. The last useful function that you might want to use is .all, which basically lists every row in your table. So what can I do with the models? CRUD. Has any of you ever heard the term CRUD before? Okay, there's a few of you. So basically, these are actions that are commonly associated with web development. It's an acronym for create, or basically you creating a resource in a database. Read, which basically show me the information about this. I'm not creating something new, something already exists. I want more information. The U stands for update. Update means, something already exists, but I want to change the information. So I'll just like, update it. And the last one is destroy. It's like, I just want to delete this information from the face of the earth. These acronyms map one-to-one onto Rails, and I'll show you the methods for them. Today we're going to be focused on the C of CRUD, or to create something. And usually we do this creation through forms. Like when you go on Facebook, you fill out a form to create an account. What happens when you create a form is you pass values like name, email, and any other associated values like age. The controller will receive those values in their params hash. If you remember from last week's lecture or homework, you get a hash of information on a request. And it'll use this information and say, oh, Rails model, generate me a new row in our database. And then after it does that, it successfully adds to the database, and we get a new entry. So to create our user, when we create let's say we already have a user's model, right? And we want to play around with our models. What we could do is pop over our Rails console, which is our Rails view, or sorry, our Rails application without any views. To make a new user, you call the model name.new. I realize it's probably not a good variable name, but on the left is the name of the variable, and on the right is a user class. It has a class method called new, and what it will do is create a new instance of a user. That user will have all the attributes that I've said exist in the user table. So when we do the instance of the object, the name of the attribute, we could set it to a value. For example, we set our user to name Charles, and then we could call .save. So here's an important bit of information. Just because you create a new instance doesn't mean it's saved into our database. It only means, hey, we have this object and it kind of exists in the memory of the Rails application. And if we never save it, it'll just disappear off into space. But if we call .save on this object, we're going to say, hey, I actually want to insert this object into our database. This will call the insert SQL statement to put it in the your database table. And Rails also provides a shortcut that you don't have to create a new one, then call .save. If you know you want to save it immediately, you can call the create method. And as you can see on the right, we have name:hello, age:5. If you remember from last week, this signifies a hash. So the create method and the new method both take a hash of values, and these hash of values will tell which attributes you want to update. And this also is more of like a reference slide, just in case you need these methods later. So what we're going to do is a live demo, and I'm going to show you what it's like to how to create a model, and just to show you like how models work and stuff. Do we have any questions before we proceed? Okay, how many of you guys actually have no clue what just happened? Okay, this is a decent amount here, and hopefully the live demo will be really helpful. And let me know if it's not. Okay. So first off, I'll open my terminal, and okay, that's probably too big. Okay. So does anybody off the top of their head remember the command I told you about to generate a model? I'm actually going to start up a new Rails application first. I'll go Rails new lecture 3. So if you don't remember this, what this means is I'm creating a new Rails application, start from scratch, and I'm just going to wait for this. But does anybody remember what the command was? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I finally installed, after running one command, now I have a Rails application called lecture 3. Right now it's completely, it's completely fresh, there's nothing in there. And the command that I was just given was Rails generate, but I could actually skip the word generate and just, it's alias to G, but just so you guys are aware, model to tell you what kind of thing I'm generating, right? Let's say like a most basic app would have a user. So I'm going Rails G model user. What are some important fields on a user? Anybody just name? Okay. And what type would name be? String. Okay. Just give me another random field that you might be interested in. Email, what would email be? String, yeah, okay. And just for the sake of having something different, since these are both strings, I'm going to add age. And what that is going to be is an integer, because we could just map age to integer. Press G, press enter. And now Rails generated a bunch of files for me. First one we care about is active record. So it invoked the active record. It created a migration file for us and a models file for us. You can ignore the rest of this. Rails automatically generates tests for you because like the Rails community is all about test-driven development. But we can ignore this for now. I'm going to open up my text editor to show what's happening. So when the files are created, it went into app. Hopefully you can see I went to app up there, models. And right now, right here, I now have a users.rb. It says class user inherits from active record base. And I'm going to make this bigger. There is nothing defined right now, but I'll guarantee that there are a bunch of methods on this because it gathers methods from active record base. The second file you want to look at is, outside of app, it's in DB, migrate. And now I have this timestamp and this migration file. And let me just go over what this does. So basically, I made, when you generate a model, it'll also generate a migration associated with the model. The class inherits from the base migration model, and it defines a change method. Basically, when you run a migration, it'll go through all your unran migrations and run the change file. If you look at this, it says create table, users. What it means is, hey, whatever database I'm looking at, I want to create a new table. And within that table, I'm going to have a string column called name, another string column called email, and one integer column called age, and also a timestamp column that you see what's passed is a null false. It's an options hash. It's basically saying within our database, we will prevent it from having null values. Okay. Okay. So right now, I'm going to run Rails C, or Rails console, right? And I'm going to call user. If you remember from earlier, I have a users class, right? So I'm going to call user because I have access to user and .new. But this will fail. Does anyone know why? Yeah. You do not need to. You can actually instantiate an empty users object with null values in all its attributes. So when I ran Rails generate model, right, I created user.rd and the migrations file, right? But can anyone guess what the status of my database is right now? Yeah, exactly. My database is empty. And does anyone know why my database is actually like just completely empty? Yeah. Yeah, I wrote a file to tell what the database to do, but I've actually never ran that file. This was the command earlier. If we go back, I really don't know how far back this is. Up here, rake db migrate. This is how you actually, after you write the changes, this is how you actually update it. So I'm going to exit out of my Rails console and run rake db migrate. And right here, it produced me some output. It gave me a timestamp, or basically when I wrote the migration, name of the migration that it ran. And what it did was it created a table called users. It took like 0.001 seconds. And the last line is saying, oh, I finished my migration, or I've successfully created this table in my database. The reason why there's outputs like this is that there's, computers aren't 100, like, they're like 99.999% like, oh, every action is going to be awesome, but sometimes it fails, so they have this logic for you. Now, my app says there are users, and now my database also says that they're users. So I do Rails C, right? And I do user.new. I've created an empty user object. I don't know if you could see all the fields right here, right? But the user has ID, which is nil, name, which is nil, email, nil, age, nil, created at nil, updated at nil. So can anyone tell me what fields did I not define in my migration file that show up in this? I couldn't quite catch that, right? Yeah, created at and updated at. And what they are special files. They're special fields generated on all Rails objects due to this t.timestamp. That's what timestamp actually does. It generates created at, updated at. And what those are associated with is once you insert it for the first time, that's its created at value. And every time you update any columns in your database, that changes its updated at value. There's one more field. Yeah, ID, exactly. We've never defined an ID, but what Rails will always do is assign an ID that is always a unique identifier for the object. It's super useful, and yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is u equals user.new, right? And now u is associated with this empty object, and now I could say u.name equals Howard, for example, right? And u.email equals a@b.com, u.age equals 5. Now, if I look at u again, I actually now have the string associated with u, Howard. Like, well, my name's Howard, its email is a@b.com, and its age is 5. This is how you start assigning fields to your database. Okay, so does anybody remember the all command in from what I just said, or can anyone tell me what it actually does? Anybody? Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to call user.all right now. And if any of you guys know, like, writing SQL queries, when you run a query, Rails will tell you what query to command. It will say, oh, select user, all the attributes from my user's table. But if you don't know SQL, you don't have to worry about it, because with Rails, you'll never need to learn it. But from what we get back is this active record relation, but it's completely empty. So this user, u, I created, isn't showing up. Why is that? Yeah. Not migrated, but I have to save it. It's called the save method. So now I press u.save. Right? So basically, if you get, this is just debugging code. Begin transaction, insert into users, all the associated details. You probably never have to read this during like the rest of the class, but in case you're doing Rails at work or something, or you just want to like learn more about how Rails is actually generating these SQL statements, you can just look at this. And save returns a true or false value, because when you insert something in a database, there's always a chance that it will fail. But so it will return true if it's a successful save and false if it didn't successfully save. So, but you never have to really worry about that. So now, if I do user.all, now in my active record relation, we have one user value. It's a long string, but that's one user. It's an empty array. So now this user exists. It's stored in my database, and as far So it's stored off to the side in this pretend CSV file. And if you look at you right now, the object I called save on, it now has an ID because that's how Rails tells if we're updating an object or inserting a new object. If the ID is nil, that means it's never existed before, so we're inserting it. And if the ID is does exist, we're updating the person. And now also on the create that date, because now I finally inserted the database and updated date matches that. So now I have it stored. How do I update information? Let's say Howard decides to get a name change into something like a Warren. U.name equals Warren. But if I call user.all, which gathers me all my users, and .first, I still have Howard. Why is that? Yeah, exactly. Important lesson, never forget to save. So it begins a transaction, okay, took some amount of time, and then if we run user.all at first, I get this, what's it called? I get Warren now. Now, I'm gonna show another example. I'm gonna create another instance of a user. L equals user.new. And another thing we can do instead of like creating a new object and then manually setting its attributes is passing a hash of attributes. So I could say, hey, this guy's name is Charles. It's email, can't spell email. It's c@d.com. Yeah. So now what it returned is a user object, and you see how the fields are already assigned. This is a way to do it without like doing it line by line. Now, here's the important part. I've created this instance of a user, right? But when I exit, I've turned off my Rails console. My memory completely disappears. Rails C. When I reopen it up, L, which was associated Charles, doesn't exist anymore. But the person that survived my application going down is Warren, because he's actually saved to the database. Yes. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you speak a little louder, or? Sorry, I still can't hear you. Is it okay if you just actually walk up a little bit and talk to me? Yeah, just, sorry, I'm actually really interested in your question. Just, can you just repeat it really loud one more time then? Yeah. So save bang errors out when so basically, you know, a lot of in the Ruby community, a lot of people actually overwrite. There's the method with the bang, or like exclamation point is also known as bang. There's a method with the bang and without, and I believe that save with the bang basically says if it fails to save, throw an error. But right now we haven't gotten over validation, so I can't really show that yet. Okay. Any other questions before I continue on? Okay. Just so we go over a little bit more of the methods that you might find useful, we could have A equals user.create. Does anybody remember what create does? In the slides? Yeah. Exactly. So I'm going to create someone named Erica, and her email is yin@y.com. Okay. So you see, unlike the new statement, this actually begins a transaction. It inserts her. So if we could use it.all, There's now 2 people in this array, and another useful method is user.count, which just basically calls the count. It's a default SQL statement, so it counts the number of entries and users, and now we have 2. Okay, yeah. Yeah, create is just calling new, then save immediately right after. But it returns the object, not a true or false value. Okay, now a quick thing to go over is querying. So basically, now I've inserted these people. I have information. How do I retrieve it? Useful method is user.find, or whatever the name of your model is, :.find. You just hand it a number, right? And it will find the person with that ID. So user.find1 gets me back Warren because he has user ID 1. But let's say I want to find user 2, user.find2, I get Erica because she has ID 2. Next, user.find by. If I pass in a hash email, yin@y.com, what it's gonna do is, instead of going by an ID, I'm passing in a different column, which is email, and then searching it by whatever, the thing I want to match with the email, which is yin@y.com. So because Erica's the only person that matched with it, she's the only one found. And where is the same thing. We could just pass it a hash of attributes. But you see this time, the difference between these two is that find returns an instance of a user, and find by basically, where returns an array. Yeah. Multiple attributes? Yeah, so you could just, so it's basically, this is another example of Rails or Ruby using an options hash. So user.find by name, it has to match the name. So the person I'm looking for has to be named Erica, and her age has to be nil. It will still find her, but let's say this person's age now has to be 5. There's no Erica that matches both the birth state. There's no Erica there's no user that is named Erica and that is also 5 years old. So that's why this returns you nil. For find by. Yeah, I believe find by does first. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's not a behavior you should rely on. If you want to, it's just something that you shouldn't rely on. It's find by just means that you want one person that matches this, but you don't care who it is. Any more questions? Yeah. Say that again? Can you guys be a little more quiet? I could barely hear. Okay, that's a good question. So when I call save and it gets an ID, I did not have to manually put in any ID. Rails will auto increment the IDs. So I could actually, for example, do user.first. I'm going to assign that to you. If you do underscore in the Rails interpreter, it gives you the last value. So now I got Warren, right? If I call delete on him, this says remove this entry from our database, right? I've taken him out, so user.all should only contain Erica with ID 2. But if I do user.create, name Nick, for example, he should have ID 3. those Rails just will keep sequentially what is the next ID to input. Yeah. So if you call find by, I don't know. I believe it does, but it's not a behavior you should rely on. It might say in the docs that it's the first one, but usually I would only use find by if you know that, or you don't care whoever comes out as long as they match these fields. Yeah.
What's the difference between user.where and user.where?
So the difference is that where gives you an array, or every person that matches these values, and find by says, I'm going to only give you one person. So it's just like, just basically it's asking for, or it changes the return value, whether you want an array or a single instance of the array. Okay. The last thing I wanted to go over was creating a migration. So let's say, oh crap, I realize age is a useless column, and I care about their phone numbers, for example, right? So I'm gonna say Rails G migration, add phone number to users. And see, this is Rails G migration, add phone number to users, and I'm going to actually put in phone number string right here. You could actually just create the migration without this phone number string, but I'm going to add that as an argument, and hopefully this works. So now I've created, you see I've invoked active record to create a migration file, and if I pop that one open, it's in your Rails app. It's not an app, it's in DB migrate, and it follows sequentially one after. Add phone numbers to users. But wait, I just wanted to show this because this is Rails doing a bunch of magic. Because if you look right here in the change method, it says add column to users. It somehow figured out from the name of this file that I wanted to change my user state, which is actually kind of insane. Like this actually blows my mind. That some guy was like, oh, if you name a file something, I'm gonna parse this file, figure out when the words break, and then figure out the name of your table, put it in there, and then, well, the phone number string, I told it what to do, but just the fact that you can add columns to users, or you figured that out, is crazy. But what I wanted to show you is that another thing is that I also said, even though we want to add phone numbers, we also want to remove age because it's useless. So I said never to edit a migration file after you migrated it. I have yet to migrate this file, so feel free to, mess it all up. So I'm going to say remove column from my users table, and the column I want to remove is age. So whenever I feel like this is ready, this is like, this is the change I want to make, right? I could do rake db migrate to tell it to actually run these changes. And then bam, it will give me a log. It's like, oh, it took 10 milliseconds to add this column, and about 1 millisecond and like 6 milliseconds to remove a column. Now when I pop open my Rails console, when I do user.new, it no longer has the age on it, but now it has phone number as a new column. So yeah, that's actually manually creating a migration to change your database. Now there's two things I wanted to note before I ended this lecture. One is, you could, even when you structure a Rails application, you could see that there's the Rails application where the model exists and how the database is separate, because your app folder is actually completely separate from your DB folder. Your DB will only care about the DB, your app will only care about the app. Another important thing is your schema.rb. We'll just delete a few lines. So your schema.rb is actually the net deltas of all your migration files. your schema.rb is auto-generated. I could delete this file and run rake db migrate and it'll regenerate this for me. But this is your absolute truth of what your database looks like. So even after I did all these change, like my migrations, you can see there are a bunch of deltas, right? And if I have like over 100, how do I figure out what my database looks like? Let's look at your schema.rb, and you'll see, oh, we have a users table. In the users table is a name, email column, and a phone number column. And what's the interesting thing? The interesting about this, if you notice, this is actually written in the Ruby code that generates a migration. So if I deleted all my migrations right now, I would definitely not recommend you do that ever in a production app. But if I were to delete this, I could actually grab what my database looks like or its final form instead of running through all the deltas by just running the schema file. That's useful. So and another point I wanted to make was, how does your your models talk to a database or different databases? Because I call .find, right? But I could have a Postgres database, a MySQL. Well, MySQL and Postgres are the same, but let's say you had a different type of database, like a NoSQL, or someone embedded their own version of a database, right? People make gems for to create the API to figure out, like, a gem or this library will figure out how to actually write the query for you. So your app only needs to know .find or .find by email. And the gem right here, gem SQLite 3, is the library that we loaded, and Rails will figure out, oh, we want to use SQLite. And you will never need to know how to actually write an insert or a get from SQLite. This gem will do that all for you. And if you care, this file shows up because you use SQLite. It's your development.sqlite3 file, and this is actually your database in like this weird format that you'll never have to read. Okay, that's the last thing I wanted to talk about. Are there any questions? Well, let's start with, are there any questions about this lecture? Things I covered? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I actually don't know the extent of its ability to do that. I know for very simple cases that it will figure it out. I think what it does is it looks for the to word and whatever the name of the, it'll guess the table name of what comes after the to. That's my best guess of how they do it. That I don't know the details, and I would not. I think it's cool, but I would not rely on it. I would definitely always look over your migration files before you run them. Okay, is that a question? Yeah, exactly. So this is like, so there's probably a gem out there that, like if you do know SQL, like a MongoDB one, instead of SQLite 3, you will probably you'll take this out and put in a gem that's like MongoDB or something, and you will never have to write a find. That gem will figure out how to convert your find into a MongoDB query. Yeah, so this is like the interchangeability about what the app is and what the database is. These gems, like SQLite 3 or Postgres gems, they will allow you to switch out the database or the app. Any more questions about the lecture? Yeah. Okay, so right now, for your SQLite, it's saved in like a text file on your computer. If you download something like MySQL or Postgres, you set up on your computer, save locally. But when you put a web app on like AWS or Heroku, you have to, it has to have its own database that's remote. Yeah. It will have its own database. So then, like let's say, for example, the Rails Decal app, I have a database locally with a bunch of fake test data, and I have my production database. It's hosted on Heroku. Heroku puts in a Postgres database, right? So in that database is all like all the information, like your homeworks that you turned in and your applications and stuff. And what I have is just a bunch of fake stuff, just to make sure nothing breaks. All right, is there any general questions about this class? Yeah. It's due tomorrow night. Yeah. So don't fret. I know a lot of people have like 170 due at 5. Just don't fret about it. And there's this like a small grace period, so don't freak out if it's like 11:58 and stuff. It's also, I know I've said this in the first lecture, but most of your grades, it's determined on you trying it rather than you getting all the right answers. Yeah, questions back? That you could store in, so basically you could technically store anything in a database because you could represent anything as a string or as like a binary string, right? And then you can insert it as, yeah, you could basically insert it as a binary string into your database. So technically you can do that, but most, like for example, most people host images, they, instead of like saving like this long bit string on their own database, they use Amazon to, actually, you tell Amazon to store this photo and they'll do it for you. Amazon hands you a URL to link to, and yeah. So to answer your question, yes, it's possible. Will you actually store images and stuff or music in your database? As far as my experience goes in web development, I have yet to do that. All right. So yeah, you guys could chill for a little bit. I'm going to set up the check-in code. So yeah, just talk amongst yourselves.